My name is Susie Tierney, and I'm the Executive Director of Just Faith Ministries. I'm sitting in for Jack Jezreel this evening, who is attending, actually, he's attending the funeral of a longtime Just Faith devotee. His name is Bob Brzezinski. And Bob lived in the Twin Cities. He served on our Just Faith Ministries board of directors and was just a tireless promoter of our programs, and he was extremely important to us as a staff, and was one of the kindest human beings I've ever met. So Jack is with him on behalf of the staff this evening. So we pray for his family and for Jack in his travels. But I am joined tonight, as always, by Leela Oakley, our Outreach and Engagement Manager at Just Faith Ministries. And so before we begin with our presenter this evening, we'll begin as we always do with prayer. And this is a prayer written by Rosemary Watola Cromer, I believe is how you pronounce her last name. So I can't save the world, can't save even myself. Can't wrap my arms around every frightened child, can't foster peace among nations, can't bring love to all who feel unlovable. So I practice opening my heart right here in this room and being gentle with my insufficiency. I practice walking down the street heart first. And if it is insufficient to share love, I will practice loving anyway. I want to converse about truth, about trust. I want to invite compassion into every interaction. One willing heart can't stop a war. One willing heart can't feed all the hungry. And sometimes, daunted by a task too big, I tell myself, what's the use of trying? But today the invitation is clear: to be ridiculously courageous in love. To open the heart like a lilac in May, knowing freeze is possible and opening anyway. To take love seriously. To give love wildly. To race up to the world as if I were a puppy, adoring and unjaded, stumbling on my own exuberance. To feel the shock of indifference, of anger, of cruelty, of fear, and stay open. To love as if it matters, as if the world depends on it. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter tonight, a familiar face to many of you and a friend of Just Faith Ministries, to be sure. Dr. Louis Brogdon is a public intellectual and a sought-out national speaker who serves as the Associate Professor of Preaching and Black Church Studies and Executive Director of the Institute for Black Church Studies at the Baptist Seminary of Kentucky. He has served in numerous positions in undergraduate and graduate institutions like Simmons College of Kentucky, Claflin University, Bluefield University, and Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. Dr. Brogdon is an accomplished writer. In addition to his newly released book, The Bible in the Ashes of Social Chaos, an Introduction to Problematic Texts, he is also the author of several books such as A Companion to Philemon, The Spirituality of Black Preaching, The New Pentecostal Message, an Introduction to the Prosperity Movement, and Hope on the Brink, the emergence of nihilism in in Black America. He is a regular contributor to Christian Ethics Today, Virginia Capital Connections Quarterly, Black Politics Today, and newspaper op-eds. Dr. Brogdon is also the author, of course, of numerous articles for academic and non-academic audiences. And he is one of the primary consultants for us on our racial justice series. And so he is a friend of ours, a consultant, and he in an email exchange, he let me know that he is might be doing a presentation at the UN at a UN event in Geneva this April. So we are just delighted to have him and that he would take some time to be with us this evening. So welcome so much, Dr. Brogdon.
Thank you, Susie, and it is so good to be with my friends and colleagues here in this very, very sacred work that we're called to, the work of bringing God's justice incrementally into manifestation in this broken world. So having good partnerships and relationships and friendships is what makes the hard work bearable. So I do want to extend my gratitude for this opportunity. Every opportunity I get to inspire, to educate, and to do some agitating tonight in the name of the Holy One. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and share my screen. And tonight's presentation, I'm going to make about 3 moves. The first move will I want to make a connection to to Monday as we celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I love teaching courses on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., writing, drawing on King's ideas to inform my theology. So I'm going to start with King because, of course, it fits the topic. Because if we understand King's work and what King was trying to help America to see in the late 60s, it really gives the kind of context and meaning we need to wrap our heads and our hearts around everything that is unfolding around us. So my second move will then be to shift from King to some of what is swirling. I will just share some powerful slides to help you to see the chaos that has engulfed this nation. And then my third shift will then draw on some of the work that I'm doing both as an intellectual as well as a public theologian, share some ideas and give some meaning that I think is going to help you as you're thinking through your place in everything that is swirling. And then I'm going to leave you with some grenade questions that are going to, just explode on your screen. Some things for you to really chew on. And it's great that we're going to have an opportunity to hop in small groups, do some processing, and then come back and you all can hit me with some wonderful questions. So let's get started. We know Monday was King Day, and of course, I love in my writing, in my teaching, to always help people to understand that there's more to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. than just King's dream. That King was more than a dreamer. That King was very, very radical. And I just love this quote from Coretta, and I like to use Coretta's biography in my King class because I like to view Coretta as a theologian in her own right, as an intellectual. She was very, very instrumental in engaging with Dr. King as they were navigating the challenges that they were confronted with in during the 50s and the 60s. And I love that she kind of gets at, yes, what happened on April the 4th, 1968 was a tragedy, but the real tragedy has been that we don't respect Dr. King as an intellectual. We don't take his ideas seriously. So while I'm very, very thankful that Dr. King's birthday is a national holiday, I'm not on social media, but I am on LinkedIn as a, trying to be a competent, responsible professional. And of course, the news feed was just inundated with folks, giving their token King quotes. Many completely out of context, don't understand what was going on when King even said that, and they don't care to know. It's just easy to sort of throw out a King quote so that it makes you look like, you're on the right side. But King was doing some serious work. It's the kind of work that got him assassinated. King was radical. So if you ever have some time and you want to take a class that will change your life, my institute, we offer courses on the life and theology of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. every 2 years. So just pay attention to the website, institute.bsk.edu. I'll be offering that course next year. And this is one of the books I reference because Kalaiako really underscored just how in the closer King got to his assassination, he was becoming more and more radical because he believed there was something fundamentally and deeply wrong with America. I love the language of his text. He describes it as a moral sickness. And the only way to remedy what's wrong with America, look at the language there, is by radical structural change. Okay, not King quotes on your Twitter feed, not King quotes on your Facebook feed, but we've got to take some radical steps. And so look, and of course, I think the apex of what King was doing during this time manifested itself in his final book, titled "Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community?" And in this book, King was not only prophetic, but really his work becomes paradigmatic for what is going to unfold in America. Now, King says in this book, we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we are going to perish together as fools. And so we either are going to make the kind of radical structural changes needed to build community for everyone, or chaos is going to engulf this nation. King called for a revolution, not folks marching up and down the streets, but I'm talking about the hard work of having a revolution of our values and really thinking critically about the kind of country we are and the kind of country that we want to be. And during those last few years of King's life, he warned America of chaos that would come. I love this quote because, for example, he says here that racism can well be the corrosive evil that will bring down the curtain on Western civilization. And that can seem alarmist. But when you study what King was saying, not only in this text, but for example, like in an address he gave when he described the three great evils of American society are racism, poverty, and militarism. King understood, and when you get into what we call critical race theory, we use the term intersectionality, that oppression is never a singular thing. It's always linked to other things, which is why you can't fix the one thing without really getting at some of these deeper structural issues. So when he says racism could be the thing that really collapses society on itself, it's because racism gets embedded and tied up into our systems, whether it's our economic systems, political systems, educational systems. It's tied to our class system, etc. He warned that we must balance intellectual and technological genius with spiritual and moral genius. And he thought America was very, very technologically advanced. But then when it came to, our spirituality, and we're not talking about your personal piety. We're talking about the kind of country we are. That we will create things that will lead to our undoing. Now, of course, in the 60s, there was all this fear around nuclear war. But just think today about artificial intelligence, machine learning, social media, things that we have created that are now sort of spinning out of our control and are actually being used to undermine the moral and social fabric of this nation. So I just want to, and those quotes that I just shared with you, if I was a betting man, and I'm not a betting man, but if I was a betting man, you probably wouldn't have seen these quotes on your Facebook feed. You know, they like the warm and the fuzzies. King had a dream. Okay, so when you hear or think of Dr. King's dream, I want you to think about radical reforms, radical structural changes, the reconstruction of our entire society, and a revolution of our values. All right. Now, of course, this metaphor of children, black and white, holding hands, of people, black and white, sitting down at the table of brother and sisterhood. Yes, that's a part of it, but it's a metaphor of society, and you don't get there by just literally holding hands. Okay, you have to get at the deeper understanding, because here is a Dr. Brogdon quote that you should put on your feed next year. That ultimately Dr. King's dream was an invitation to community. And that invitation was rejected. So I get the wonderful privilege next month at lecturing at the University of Central Florida on King's confession that his dream became a nightmare, and why it is important for America to understand this shift in King's life. So America decided to create this mythic figure of Dr. King, and to not do the hard work to really bring this dream into reality. So we started around 69, 70. We move into the era of mass incarceration, and we start the road to chaos. And a lot of these things begin to unfold themselves in the following decades. I do want to note that during the era of mass incarceration, more African Americans will be caught up in the criminal justice system than all the African Americans who were enslaved in 1865. Okay, so a vicious system. So if you haven't read the book, The New Jim Crow, you should read that book. The gains that the African American community received from key pieces of civil rights legislation in 64, 65, and 68, we started losing those gains in the 80s. Okay, and so the Reagan years were a difficult time for the African American community, because of course you get that in tandem with the war on crime. And there's a lot to that, and I'm gonna hold off on going into too much detail. So what ends up happening, because this is the path we followed, we set the stage for the chaos that has recently, so just go back a few years, not long, to about 2020, and just in your mind for a few moments, all these things have just happened in the past few years. Of course, we know the global pandemic, all the protests that engulfed the nation. These protests were a global spectacle. People from all over the world were watching this. The largest public protest in Germany in our lifetime happened in 2020 because of the murder of George Floyd. In the city of Louisville, you had militia groups having public standoffs in our streets. You know, everyone's, you know, armed up. I mean, it was a tense year. And then we thought, okay, 2020 is over. We're gonna kind of settle back into some normalcy. Then we get the contestant of the election and the storming of the Capitol to keep from certifying the election. There's everything that's going on with our environment, and the billions of dollars it costs to help communities reconstitute themselves, and who's really being affected by these natural disasters. What we have done in America is we have chosen chaos over community. And some of the hard work that is before us is to try to help our sisters and brothers, our neighbors, to turn away from this chaos and to start making some significant steps and overtures toward some vision of community. Now, to me, the Obama presidency really intensified. It was like throwing fire on the, that road, that slide I showed you with the road. All right, the Obama presidency was like fire on all of that. Okay, and it just kind of really exposed the underbelly of America. But I don't like to do too much talking because there are some things on this slide that really hit home for some of us. I mean, Roe v. Wade, something that many of us thought would never, why would we overturn Roe v. Wade? It was overturned. The affirmative action decision, that's another big loss. And now we've moved from the Tea Party and MAGA to this white Christian nationalist movement, that America is supposed to be a Christian nation. And it's not about the Christian religion. That's dog whistling, that's code language. It's a different way of talking that we sort of lost our way. And now we are experiencing, in Black studies, there's a term and we call it white backlash. And what the term white backlash gets at is every time there is progress, there is always pushback. So if there's a win, if there's a piece of legislation, if there's a social or cultural breakthrough, our sisters and brothers in the white community, they will make us pay for that. Okay, so you get the March on Washington. King tells the nation he has a dream. Lyndon Johnson, they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Okay, the summer of 1965, all hell breaks loose in this country. The Klan comes, out of the closet, reasserts themselves, launched national campaigns, and it was a long, hot summer in '65. So you get an Obama, wow, African American in the White House, but then you get the white backlash. So in 2020, there was all the protests. More of our white sisters and brothers wanted to do some listening. Some people opened up their pocketbooks. Some organizations made some structural changes. And guess what happened? Now we're dealing with the backlash, with the anti-woke movement, the attack on CRT, the dismantling of DEI, whether it's in business, whether it's in education. Harvard had the first African-American to be president, that prestigious institution that's sitting on billions of dollars, and the first African-American president of Harvard lasted 6 months. So we are a country in chaos. Look at that good-looking guy. Who is that? That's a talk I gave last year based on an op-ed I wrote in 2021, that America, we are in a fight for our soul. And so that's why you are here tonight, because you are doing some of this hard work, but I think some of these images get at how some of you feel tonight. Weary, discouraged. It just seems like we're not making the kind of progress that we hoped. I've had some hard moments the past few years because it is exhausting. There are days it is very, very discouraging. There are moments it looks like we have made absolutely no progress. That if you look at the data on wealth, the African-American community, we have 2.6% of the wealth of this country. Now we're about 13.4% of the population. We only got 2.6% of the wealth. That's the same wealth we had in 1865. And by 2053, the Black community will be at zero wealth. Okay, so we will be, along with our Native American sisters and brothers, completely disenfranchised. So in the years since 1865, we have not made 1% of progress when it comes to the accumulation of wealth. And this is why I love to go back to scripture. I love to sit with certain scriptures and scenes because I just think it gives meaning to, how we feel. I love the story of Elijah in the cave because this story, you have God coming to a prophet who is in a very, very bad place. This prophet had just experienced this super high, this breakthrough. God shows up and, sends down fire to consume the altar. And, Elijah has all these false prophets put to death. And Jezebel says, by this time tomorrow, you're going to be dead. And he's running for his life. He's like, nothing's changed. Okay, I'm wasting my time. Look what he says. He says, I've had enough. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Then he went into a cave and he spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him. Listen to what it said. What are you doing here, Elijah? Okay, that'll preach. What are you doing here? Now, God is not asking that question because God doesn't know where Elijah is. God wants Elijah thinking about, why are you here? And here is what Elijah, he thought he was by himself. And God told him, no, I have plenty of others who have not bowed the knee. And so what I want to leave you with as I shift from this sort of chaos that has engulfed our nation is to provide some context that I think can provide some encouragement, some hope, and some strength for us to keep on keeping on. And if we're going to do this, it's interesting the shift God makes with Elijah's thinking. He wants Elijah to understand, okay, there's a lot more going on than just what's happening in the immediacy of your life. And then there are lots of other people who are involved in this struggle. And so if you are going to be effective in this work, you can't do it alone. And you also have to understand the relationship between some of the individual or even or some of the small things we're seeing happening here in America, because they're really a microcosm of broader forces. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. This is why it's important to study the writings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Because in some of his speeches, you will read King talking about what is happening in other parts of the world and why that's important to what is happening in America. Because King understood the relationship between a movement here versus broader global forces at play. And of course, King didn't do this work by himself. And we are here because we are in this together. So we need to, maybe you're new to some of this justice work. You have maybe been in the church that says all God wants you to do is just go to church services. Jesus died on the cross, so you can go to church services a couple days a week. And you starting to get your eyes open that God's kingdom is about the world. Or maybe you don't have the right connections, or you need to deepen some connections and partnerships. Be connected with people who are not talking about the work, but who are actually doing the work. And you know what? God has really surprised me. There are folks who aren't necessarily like in church buildings who are doing some of this work. And I've just had the wonderful privilege to get connected to the United Nations through an initiative called the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And as an executive director of a National Black Studies Institute, I've had opportunities to be in these spaces and to meet people who are doing God's work out in the world. They just are working for, you know, like a non-religious organization, but they're doing God's work. And that has been a connection for me that has been life-giving. Because the United Nations is doing something, and I want you, for those of you who want some homework, I want you to look up the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Okay. It is an agenda that they launched years ago that goes up to 2030. And it is a detailed agenda, and they report every year the progress they are making towards moving our world a little closer to Dr. King's vision of community. And so, you know, so the opportunity to kind of partner with them and to learn about this work has been life-giving. But there's even an office in our government that's paying attention to these things. But I do want to give you just a quick quote, and I'm going to hurry up to my end. From a report published by the United Nations, and the report is titled "Layers of Uncertain." So the report is basically chronicling the uncertainty that's engulfing our nation. Now, I am going to Geneva, April the 16th through the 19th. And if you want to go and be a part of the proceedings for the Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, that racial justice work is really being done on the international stage. There are actually governments that's taking up this work. That's a wonderful example to America. We can learn from them. I want to invite you to join me. But this report says we live in a world of worry. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which has driven reversals in human development in almost every country and continues to spin off variants unpredictably. War in Ukraine and elsewhere, more human suffering amid a shifting geopolitical order and strained multilateral system, record-breaking temperatures, fires, and storms, each an alarm bell from planetary systems increasingly out of whack. Listen to the language of the report. Acute crises are giving way to chronic, layered interacting uncertainties at a global scale. And this is a full report. They are doing work to help us to understand what's going on. Now, you may have seen this graphic before if I've taught. Now, in the past, what I call global issues, you know, I talked about the impact of the COVID pandemic, how it impacted America. Because what COVID did was basically exacerbated all of these deep structural issues we have in this country that we have refused to fix since the days of Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, so we've gotten kind of on the other side of the COVID pandemic. But I got news for you. You just take that word where it says global issues, issue or issues. You could put COVID there. You can put the war in Israel there. And it just reveals, it exacerbates, it ignites these deeper structural issues that we have. I'm gonna show you how this works. Watch this. I call it the social death spiral. We'll have to face an issue that's complex and layered, like this war in Israel. Okay, it's geopolitics is a little complicated. Okay, and if folks love binary thinking, either or, then it's really hard to wrap your head around something that's a little complex. So in America, there's an issue that's kind of complicated. We like to politicize it, then we weaponize it, and then we use it in ways to either produce violence or gridlock, where we basically can't do anything. We can't make any progress. Now, this is the exact same thing happened with COVID. It was a public health issue. It got politicized, it got weaponized, and what happened? You know, folks were dying, businesses were being significantly hurt, etc. Now, I got news for you. Now, this war in Israel and Palestine, there's going to be a next thing. And you'll see this same thing kind of unplaying itself. because as a country, we don't know how to really grapple with complex and layered issues. Our colleges and universities have produced a bunch of people who are not critical thinkers. We love binaries, sort of either or thinking, group think, instead of learning how to say it's a little both and learning how to have some hard conversations. There's another way to think about this sort of social death spiral. It's to think about what happens when we get in groups. When we get in groups, it's easier to participate in immorality against other people. You would do things in a group you would never do on your own. All it takes is the right situational forces influencing your group. And then what ends up happening is your group can then participate in things that are, it could be, violent, us against them kind of thing. And then you become the very thing you hate. Let me go back to King before I wrap this up. King warned us about this death spiral that we're on. We're in this society where hatred and violence is our social currency, not love. And I'm not talking about feel-good love, but choosing love, rejecting hate. Because the path to hate is nothing but the path to chaos. King lays this out there. Because every time you turn to hate, all it does is compound the situation. Zimbardo, so if you don't like religion, it's in social psychology. He talks about the Lucifer effect, how good people turn evil. And how do you get good people participating in things like the Holocaust, genocide that we've seen in parts of Asia? What they do in groups. So there's lots of winds blowing today, and I think there are some winds you need to pay attention to. And I think a lot of it revolves around how we are participating in groups. I'm sure you have never heard the term group narcissism. Well, you have tonight. Our groups can become so narcissistic, so full of ourselves. We're right about everything. The way we frame moral and philosophical issues is the only way. Everyone else is a buffoon. They're a threat. What's really checking some of those instincts in our groups? So I want to share a new resource with you. It's coming out from the institute that I run. It's called America on the Brink, Musings on Politics, Racism, and Religion. I'm going to gift 5 copies to Susie and Just Faith Ministries, and you all can fight it out with her how you're going to get those. But yes, I will get those to you. And there are some things in that book that really speak to some things that's swirling around us. So I want to end with some questions for you. And I want to make sure that you have that Susie or somebody has time to take a picture of it so they know what your marching orders are going to be when you go into your small groups. But I would like for you to think about how do we slow or reverse the social death spiral we are on? I would like for you to think about that as I showed you those 2 graphics that in different ways, it shows you these sort of dysfunctional forces that lead us to nowhere. It leads us to chaos. What would it mean for our organizations, our churches, our families, our communities to maybe slow this descent? Okay, I'm not teaching that we need to be messiahs and fix the world, but how do we at least slow down? Hey, come on, this is going nowhere. Where do you see yourself in the radical structural work necessary to build a better America? King said, we don't get to community without some radical structural work. But it's really hard for people who have been so privileged. to divest themselves of their privilege. But they want a better world, but they don't want to make any sacrifices to make that happen. So your organizations, you have work to do. And I would love for you to think about the kinds of the forms of group work you need to be taking up. I'm not talking about you fixing all the other groups, but what does it mean to do some both and? Because yes, we are called to be prophetic and to speak truth to power, but it must always be a prophetic slant that is Eucharistic. The Eucharist always calls us back to self-examination in relation to others. And that has seemed to be completely lost on people. That what it means to be prophetic is to always tell everyone else, you have a speck in your eye. So have some fun in your small groups, chewing on some of those rhetorical grenades. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. We hope you had good conversation in your breakout rooms. We'll now open for a time of Q&A. So if you haven't already, I'd invite you to send your questions via the chat. And you can send those either to me or to Susie. And we'd love to answer. And actually, I'd encourage you to send those to me because Susie's having to do a little rearranging for some tech challenges. So if you have any questions, please send them my way. Dr. Brogdon, are you back with us in the main space?
Yes, can you hear me?
There you go.
Yes.
I could see you. You were
Thank
hiding
you,
amongst the other
Leela.
faces.
I am having some tech challenges, so I have both my phone and my computer booted up, but we'll see how long my computer behaves itself. So while you all are putting some questions in the chat to Leela or I, either one, let's start with Dr. Brogdon. Say a little bit more about group narcissism. I'm just so curious. That is the first time I've heard that this evening. And
I know it.
Yeah, I'm looking for a definition. I'm a deeper definition.
Well, you know, I'm trying. One of the most important things I learned in seminary and was one of the books I read was by Reinhold Niebuhr called Moral Man, Immoral Society. And what Niebuhr was talking about was that in groups, there is a form of self-interest that we don't pay attention to, that individually we have the capacity to check some of our, wrongful and sinful impulses. But when we get in groups, group identity, group solidarity, group power, they operate in pervasive ways. And so we end up not being as cognizant of how our group is functioning in relation to other groups. There's less of a willingness to check impulse. So I love that, sure, the research is talking about tribalism, populism, nationalism. These are very, very important forces in play in this country and around the world. But there's also this narcissism I wanted to get at. As I recall my days from being on social media, I've had to take a break since 2020. And the break has been going on for about 4 years. That people get together with people they agree with, and they love kind of patting themselves on the back, thinking that they're right about everything. The way they frame every issue is completely correct. It's just a different form of group loyalty that what the narcissism really gets at as is this really the love of your group that has this, uncritical dimension that's at work, that you're so sure, you're so right. So many people are patting you on the back. You're patting each other on the back. That's right. That's right. That it does lead to just more gridlock and really not having that sort of Eucharistic impulse that every group needs to have. So I'm always the awkward person. I'm always the one, no matter what group I'm in, saying, yeah, but And then, so then they're looking at me like, you're supposed to be, like, agreeing with everything we say. And it's like, no, we have to think about ourselves in relation to others, even people we don't agree with. If I had more time, I'd tell you the story of Narcissus that fell in love with his image.
Thank you for that. It sounds a lot like what the quote from Kierkegaard, there's no such thing as a smart group.
Yes.
Can be true sometimes. I have a question here, Dr. Brogdon. How can we deal with the lack of an agreed upon truth among people? For example, people who watch different news channels have different views of reality, and your perspective is very real to you, whether or not it's actually real in the universe. So, yeah. So, your thoughts on that?
Well, this is why I love the language of King's book. He says we have to learn to live together as brothers and sisters. Now, we don't have to learn how to agree, how to think the same way. We just have to learn how to live together. And what has really broken down in this country, people want to always make it about the issue. That it's the issue why we can't live together as brothers, and I just think it's deeper than that. It's more to it than that. That sometimes we create idols out of issues, and we make issues like a god that we're willing to sort of die on that hill for. Now, part of being a religious person, an educated person, a person, is having beliefs and convictions. But how do we understand that we live in a world with people who have different beliefs and convictions? It's not easy. It's something that notice the word I said, we have to learn how to do this together. And I don't think there's a lot of there's no easy way to it. But that's the challenge before us. America, we are a democracy. We are a country where you can have people who believe, some of the wildest conspiracy theories you ever heard, down to, very, very thoughtful church-going Christians. We're all citizens, so we're trying to learn how to live together versus living fragmented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Dr.
Great
Brogdon.
question.
And maybe one last question for us tonight. Can you speak a little bit more about white nationalism and where is the primary threat within white nationalism? What do you think the primary threat is? And then where can we be most effective at reclaiming a faith tradition that feels like it's been taken wildly out of context?
Well, I do want to encourage you to pay attention to the work of Jemar Tisby, who was a scholar at Simmons College of Kentucky, and he has done some wonderful work on this. He has moderated, been on some panels. Tisby believes that white Christian nationalism is the greatest threat we are facing. It's really redefining the Christian tradition, really embedding and aligning itself with the state, that America should be like a theocracy. That's a Christian nation run by God, but it's really gonna be controlled by white people and taking care of their interests. That America was supposed to be a white Christian nation. So it's actually trying to go back and capture some of the most dangerous impulses in our history. And you do know, we enslaved Africans for hundreds of years, participated in the genocide of Native Americans. So these impulses can have a violent end. We fought things like civil wars. So people just think some of this is sort of inflammatory thinking, inflammatory rhetoric, but no. this is becoming an actual movement where people believe America's supposed to be a Christian nation. And to me, it doesn't have very much to do with the Christian tradition. It's very much about whiteness. And Christianity is the mask, it's the cloak for this sort of white nationalist agenda.
Always a treat to have you on, Dr. Brogdon. Thank you so much. And I'll do my best impression of Jack. If we could all do our visual clap on mute. Thank you. Thank you again for being here. Of course, safe travels. If we can't go with you to the UN physically, you could take us all in your heart as you do that work on a global scale. So thank you.
I will.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Before we close tonight, I'd just like to take 30 seconds here to recommend one of our programs for your consideration. And that is what we do. We write programs for faith communities, people of faith. I know that many of you have probably taken at least one of our 3 racial justice programs, but I want to call your attention to faith and racial healing. It might well be the single most impactful program that we offer. It's really taking a look at our history of racism in the U.S. This 8-week program guides participants in telling the truth about the history of racism here in the U.S. so that we might work toward true reconciliation with God and restoration with one another. I don't think anyone has been unmoved by this program, honestly, in our world. So Leela put the link to that program in the chat. That was also one of the programs that Dr. Brogdon was a consultant on for us. And so we're grateful for him in that way as well. And then just finally, we do these Acting for Justice webinars once a month. We will have another presenter next month in February on the 3rd or 4th Tuesday of the month. The 3rd Thursday comes very early in the month, so it may be the 4th. And we were not able to finalize the presenter information before this evening, but if we are able to finalize it, it will show up in your follow-up email or in a additional follow-up email. So you'll be aware of who that next presenter is. So stay tuned on that. And then thank you all so much for being here. We'll end tonight's presentation as we always do. We begin and we end both in prayer. And so this is the closing prayer by one of my favorite poets and authors. It's by Jan Richardson, and it's entitled Ashes. Now more than ever, let us be the ones who will not turn away. Let us be the ones who will go further into the wreck and deeper into the rubble. Let us be the ones who will enter into places of devastation beyond belief and despair, beyond imagining. And there let us listen for the spirit that brooded over the formless darkness. And there let us look again for the God who gathered up the chaos and began to create. Let us be the ones who will give ourselves to the work of making again and to the endless beginning of creation. Thank you all again, and good night.